Eh. The coffee was still hot when my sister called. I remember that detail clearly because I had just poured it. Dark roast, no sugar, the way I've taken it for 40 years. And I was standing at the kitchen window watching the sprinklers run across the back lawn. It was a Tuesday morning in October. The light was doing that thin, pale thing it does in autumn when the sun feels like it's apologizing for showing up at all. My wife was upstairs. I could hear the shower running. The phone buzzed on the counter. My sister's name on the screen. She's a deputy sheriff. Has been for 22 years. Works traffic and patrol in the county where she grew up, about 40 minutes from our house. We talk on Sundays mostly. Not Tuesdays. Not at 7:40 in the morning. I picked up. "Is your wife home?" she said. No hello. No good morning. Just that. I looked up at the ceiling, toward the sound of the shower. "She's upstairs," I said. "Getting ready. Why?" There was a pause. The kind that doesn't mean the call dropped. The kind that means the person on the other end is deciding something. "I need you to listen to me carefully," my sister said. "I'm sitting in my patrol car on Granger Mill Road, about a quarter mile from the Riverside Shopping Center. I just watched a woman who looks exactly like your wife walk out of the Java House coffee shop with a man I don't recognize. They got into a silver sedan together. She was laughing. She was carrying a weekend bag. I didn't say anything. She was wearing that burgundy coat," my sister said. "The one with the wide collar. The one you gave her for Christmas 2 years ago. The shower was still running upstairs." "That's not possible," I said. "She's here. I can hear the water." "I know what I saw," my sister said quietly. "I know her face." My sister and my wife had known each other for 31 years. They had stood beside each other at my retirement party. They had spent a week together at the beach house the summer before last. My sister was not a woman who made mistakes about faces. I set the coffee down. I didn't drink it again for 2 hours. "My name is Gerald. I'm 64 years old. I spent 38 years as a civil engineer for the county, mostly overseeing road infrastructure and drainage projects. I retired 3 years ago. My wife, whom I'll call my wife throughout because she has family who might one day read something like this, and I see no reason to make it easier for them to find it. We had been married for 29 years at the time of this story. 29 years is a long time, long enough that you stop noticing certain things. Long enough that the details of another person become furniture, familiar, useful, no longer seen. I know her coffee order. I know the way she breathes when she's asleep. I know she hums when she's anxious. Old hymns from her childhood she probably doesn't realize she still remembers. I know the small crescent scar on the inside of her left wrist from a garden accident in 2009. I know the birthmark at the base of her neck, just below the hairline. I thought I knew everything. That is what 29 years does to you. It makes you believe that knowing is the same thing as paying attention. After I hung up with my sister, I stood in the kitchen for a long moment. Then I walked to the bottom of the stairs and listened. The shower had stopped. I could hear the soft sounds of someone moving around in the bedroom. Drawers opening. The closet door. The particular rhythm of a morning routine I had heard thousands of times. I went back to the kitchen. I sat down at the table. I thought about what my sister had said. There were 2 possibilities, and neither one made sense. Either my sister, a trained law enforcement officer with sharp instincts and 22 years of reading people, had made an error, or the woman upstairs was not my wife. I've always been an engineer by temperament, not just by profession. I do not like incomplete information. I do not make decisions without data. So I sat at that table and I thought methodically about everything I had observed over the past several weeks, looking for things I had filed away without examining. And there were things, small things, the kind you dismiss individually, because each one on its own means nothing, but that begin to accumulate when you arrange them in a row. 3 weeks earlier, my wife had come home from what she said was her Tuesday book club looking different. Not different in a way I could name, just different in the way a room looks when you come back from vacation and realize someone has been inside. Everything is where you left it, but the air is wrong. She had seemed distracted at dinner. I had assumed she was tired. I had not asked. 2 weeks before that, I had come into the living room to find her ending a phone call. She had set the phone face down on the sofa cushion. I had noticed and then immediately unnoticed it, the way you do when you don't want to start a conversation you're not sure you're ready to have. There had been a new bottle of perfume on her dresser that I didn't recognize. I had assumed she had treated herself to something. I had not asked about that either. I had been auditing the wrong column. She came downstairs at 8:15. She was dressed for what she had told me was a lunch with her friend from church and then a trip to the garden center. She was wearing the burgundy coat. I felt something cold move through me. "Morning," she said, and went to the coffee maker. "Morning," I said. I watched her. She moved to the kitchen the way she always did, efficiently, without wasted motion, filling her travel mug, rinsing the carafe. Nothing seemed wrong. Everything seemed exactly right, which was itself starting to seem wrong. "What time do you think you'll be back?" I asked. "Probably around 4, she said. "Maybe 4:30. She kissed me on the cheek. I smelled her perfume. It was the new one, the one from the unfamiliar bottle. She picked up her weekend bag from beside the front door. I had not noticed it there before. It was packed full. "Overnight things," she said, following my gaze. "I might stay at Dolores's tonight if we end up having too much wine at dinner. I mentioned it last week." She had not mentioned it last week. I heard the front door close. I sat at the kitchen table and I called my sister back. "The woman who just left this house," I said, "was wearing the burgundy coat." My sister was quiet. "2 women," I said, "both wearing the same coat." "Gerald," my sister said slowly, "that's not possible." "No," I said, "it's not." But it was the only explanation that fit the data. I want to be precise about what happened next, because I think precision matters. I am not a dramatic man by nature. I do not make decisions quickly or emotionally. I sat at that table for a long time before I did anything at all. And the first thing I did was not call a lawyer or confront anyone. The first thing I did was go upstairs to the bedroom and look carefully at things I had been looking at for years without seeing. The perfume bottle on the dresser, a brand I didn't recognize purchased recently. The seal still half intact. On its own, nothing. Her nightstand drawer, her reading glasses, a paperback she'd been working through for 2 months, a chapstick, a small notepad. I opened the notepad. The pages were blank except for a few lines near the back. A list of numbers. What looked like account figures. A name I didn't recognize. On its own, possibly nothing. Her closet, everything in its usual order. But near the back, behind a row of hanging blouses, a second weekend bag. Already packed. I unzipped it. Clothes I didn't recognize. A toiletry kit. A phone charger. And tucked into the interior pocket, a folded sheet of paper. I unfolded it. It was a printed confirmation for a hotel reservation. 2 nights. The hotel was 4 hours away, in a city where we knew no one. The reservation was under a name that was not my wife's name. Check-in was yesterday. Check-out was tomorrow. 2 nights. She had left yesterday morning, apparently, and returned yesterday evening, apparently, and was now leaving again. Or she had never left at all. Or she had left and someone else had come back. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Then I called my son. He lives 40 minutes away, works in insurance, has his mother's practical nature and his father's habit of thinking before he speaks. I told him what I had found. I told him what my sister had seen. I did not editorialize. I listed the data points in order. He was quiet for almost a full minute. "Dad," he said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer carefully." "Go ahead. Has Mom seemed different to you lately?" "In any specific way?" I told him about the perfume, the face-down phone, the slight distraction at dinner, the way she had moved through the kitchen this morning with a kind of careful correctness, like someone following instructions. He was quiet again. "She called me last Thursday," he said. "I didn't think much of it at the time, She asked about whether I knew anything about financial power of attorney. She said she was asking for a friend whose husband was dealing with memory issues. I didn't question it. I looked down at my hands. I don't have memory issues, I said. No, he said, you don't. I want to be honest about the next part because it is the part I find most difficult to explain. I was not angry. I know that's not what people expect to hear. I was not angry. I was not panicked. I was not even particularly afraid. What I felt was something closer to the feeling I used to get when I was reviewing blueprints and found a structural error. A quiet, heavy kind of attention. A narrowing. A need to understand the full scope before deciding what to do. My son came over that afternoon. We sat at the kitchen table and we went through our joint accounts carefully. What we found took about 40 minutes to piece together. Over the previous 11 months, there had been a pattern of transfers, never more than $9,000 at a time, always to the same external account, always spaced far enough apart to avoid pattern detection, 43 transfers in total. I did the arithmetic, $381,000. My son set down the printout and looked at me. This has been planned for a long time, he said. Yes, I said. This isn't a woman who decided to cheat and got reckless, he said. No, I said. This is a woman who decided to leave and built a runway first. The woman who had been in this house, moving through my kitchen with careful correctness, answering to my wife's name, wearing my wife's coat. I thought about the scar. The crescent scar on the inside of the left wrist. I could not remember if I had noticed it this morning. I could not remember if I had looked. That is what 29 years does to you. It makes you stop looking at the things you think you already know. My sister came over that evening. She had run the silver sedan's plates after she'd called me. The registration came back to a name she didn't recognize, at an address in a neighboring county. The car had no violations, no flags. A clean, ordinary person's car. She had also, using resources I will not describe in detail because I have no interest in creating problems for her professionally, pulled up a property search on the hotel address from the confirmation I found. The reservation name matched a woman whose address was 8 miles from our house. We sat at my kitchen table, my son, my sister, and I, and we laid out what we had. The woman in the silver sedan whom my sister had seen that morning. The hotel reservation. The transfers. The packed bag in the closet. The careful, coached way the woman in this house had moved through my morning. She hired someone, my sister said, to be here, to hold your attention so you wouldn't look for her. Someone who knows her well enough to pass, my son said. I thought about the perfume. The new bottle, not hers, used by someone who didn't know exactly what my wife smelled like, so use a different scent instead of trying to replicate the right one. She couldn't have known I would notice, I said. Did you notice? My sister asked. I noticed the bottle, I said. I didn't understand what it meant. There is a particular kind of grief that is not about love exactly, or not only about love. It is the grief of having been assessed, of realizing that someone studied you, your habits, your attention, your blind spots, and concluded that you could be managed, that your trust was not something to be honored, but something to be used as cover. That your 29 years of showing up, of being steady, of being the kind of man who doesn't make waves and doesn't ask hard questions, all of that had been quietly translated into predictability, into a tool. I had been reliable in the way a road is reliable. Something you build your route around, something that holds your weight without protest. Something you stop thinking about because it has never given you reason to. I sat with that for a long time. The next morning, I called a lawyer, not an aggressive one, not a theatrical one, a careful one, the kind who reads everything twice and says very little until he's certain. I brought him the account statements. I brought him the hotel confirmation. I told him about my sister's observation and the property search. I told him everything in the same order I have told you without editorializing. He was quiet for a moment when I finished. You've been quite calm about all of this, he said. I spent 38 years finding structural failures, I said. The work doesn't get better if you lose your composure. He nodded. "Give me 48 hours," he said. What he found in those 48 hours is, in some ways, the least surprising part of the story. My wife, my actual wife, in a hotel 4 hours away, had already engaged a divorce attorney. The filings were being prepared. The financial transfers, her attorney would presumably argue, were her own money, taken from joint accounts over time, in anticipation of a settlement she expected to be unfavorable. Whether that argument had legal merit was now someone else's problem to sort through. That is what lawyers are for. What I could not stop thinking about in those 48 hours was not the money. Money is recoverable or it isn't, and in either case it is money. What I could not stop thinking about was the planning. 11 months of careful, methodical preparation. 11 months of living in this house, sitting across from me at this table, lying in that bed, and building an exit. 11 months of deciding I did not deserve to be consulted, to be spoken to be offered the simple honesty of, "I'm not happy, I want something different." 11 months of deciding it was easier to manage me than to talk to me, and I kept returning to the question I least wanted to answer, which was, had I made it easy? Had the way I moved through our marriage, efficiently, without wasted motion, filling my days with structure and routine, never creating turbulence, never asking the questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered, had all of that told her, without my ever saying it, that I was not a man who could handle the truth? I had maintained our marriage the way I maintained county roads, on schedule, without incident, without ever asking whether the road itself was going somewhere either of us still wanted to go. I don't say this to excuse what she did. What she did was a planned deception of a scale and duration that I still find difficult to entirely comprehend. Hiring a woman to occupy her place in this house, arranging her disappearance behind a curtain of ordinary life, treating our home like a stage set and me like a standing prop. What she did was wrong, clearly, specifically, documentably wrong. But I have learned at 64 that the question of who wronged whom and the question of what I contributed to the conditions are not the same question. They can both be true. They usually are. My son asked me once, during one of the quieter evenings that followed, whether I had been happy. He asked it gently, the way he asks most things, not as an accusation, just as a real question. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. I was content, I said. "Is that the same thing?" he asked. "I used to think so," I said. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. The financial matter was resolved in a way that was neither everything I'd hoped for nor as bad as I had feared, which is about as much as you can usually say for legal processes. The woman who had been in this house, I learned her name eventually, though I see no reason to use it here, was a former acquaintance of my wife's, someone from years back, paid for her time and her discretion. She was not charged with anything, as the situation did not rise to a level that warranted it. She has, as far as I know, gone on with her life. My wife, as far as I know, has gone on with hers. I still live in this house. I still drink dark roast coffee at the kitchen window in the morning and watch whatever the yard is doing at that hour. The sprinklers still run on Tuesdays. The light still does that apologetic thing in October. My sister calls on Sundays, sometimes on Tuesdays. I always answer, what I know now that I did not know then is that the most important maintenance is not the kind you put on a schedule. It is not the quarterly reviews and the annual check-ins, and the steady, unremarkable presence that says I am here without ever asking or being asked. The most important maintenance is attention, real attention, the kind that sees the new perfume bottle and asks about it, the kind that notices the face-down phone and decides the question is worth the discomfort, the kind that looks every so often at the people it loves and asks, "Are we still going somewhere together? Do you still want to be here?" I did not ask those questions. For many years I did not ask them. I assumed the road was fine because no one had reported a problem. That is the thing about structural failures. They do not always announce themselves. They accumulate quietly, below the surface, in places the routine inspection doesn't reach. And then one morning your sister calls, and your coffee is still hot, and the shower is running upstairs, and everything sounds exactly like it always has. And you stand at the window and begin to understand that the sound of normal is not the same as the sound of well. I know that now. I am 64 years old, and I know that now. I hope it is of some use to you.